The September heat was brutal as Tommy Rodriguez stepped off the subway at Shea Stadium on September 21, 1984, clutching a $27 ticket that represented 3 days of overtime at the loading dock in Queens. At 21 years old, with hands permanently stained from unloading trucks and dreams of someday making it out of his neighborhood, Tommy was about to witness something that would change his understanding of what was possible in professional football. The New York Jets versus the Miami Dolphins, a Thursday night game that nobody expected to be particularly memorable. The Jets were coming off a disappointing season, and while the Dolphins had Dan Marino, their rookie quarterback was still largely unproven at the professional level. Tommy had grown up in Astoria, the son of Puerto Rican immigrants who'd worked double shifts their entire lives to give their children opportunities they'd never had. Football wasn't particularly important in the Rodriguez household. His father preferred baseball, his mother didn't follow sports at all. But Tommy had developed a passion for the Jets that bordered on religious devotion. It wasn't logical. The Jets hadn't been consistently good during Tommy's lifetime, and they played in a baseball stadium that felt more suited to the Mets than professional football. But there was something about the team's blue-collar identity, their status as perpetual underdogs, their connection to working-class New York, that resonated with a kid whose family had been struggling to achieve the American dream for 2 generations. The ticket in Tommy's pocket represented a significant sacrifice. $27 was grocery money, electric bill money, the kind of expenditure that required careful consideration in a household where every dollar mattered. But the Jets were hosting Monday Night Football for the first time in years, and Tommy had convinced himself that being there for such a rare occasion was worth the financial strain. He'd bought the ticket from a scalper outside the stadium 2 hours before kickoff, using money he'd saved by skipping lunch for a week and walking to work instead of taking the bus. The seat was in the upper deck, section 56, row Q, so far from the field that the players would look like action figures. But it was inside Shea Stadium, on a night when the whole country would be watching, and that felt like participation in something larger than his normal routine of work, sleep, and dreams of something better. As Tommy climbed the concrete ramps toward his section, he could feel the electricity that marked Monday Night Football. This wasn't just another game. This was prime-time television, national exposure, the kind of platform where legends were made and careers were defined. The crowds were bigger, the stakes felt higher, and everyone in the stadium understood they were part of something that would be remembered. Section 56 was packed with the kind of fans Tommy recognized, working-class people from Queens and Brooklyn and the Bronx, who'd scraped together money they couldn't really afford because they understood that some experiences were worth the sacrifice. These weren't corporate executives treating clients to entertainment. These were people for whom football represented tribal identity, civic pride, and temporary escape from the grinding realities of economic uncertainty. Tommy found his seat, row Q, seat 14, and discovered he was sitting behind a man who looked to be in his 50s, wearing a Jets jersey that had seen better years and carrying a small cooler that probably contained beer he'd smuggled past security. "First time at Monday Night Football?" the man asked, extending a hand. "I'm Mickey Torino, been coming to Jets games since they played at the Polo Grounds." Tommy Rodriguez. And yeah, first time for Monday Night Football. Hell of a lot different than regular Sunday games. Mickey nodded with the wisdom of someone who'd seen enough football to understand the distinctions that mattered. Monday Night Football is different. Players play harder, crowds are louder, everything matters more. You picked a good night to be here, kid. As they talked, Tommy learned that Mickey was a construction foreman from the Bronx who'd been following the Jets through decades of disappointment and occasional triumph. He'd seen Joe Namath's guarantee and Super Bowl victory, had endured the lean years that followed, had maintained his season tickets through coaching changes and personnel disasters that would have broken the spirit of fans with less stubborn loyalty. "What do you think about this Marino kid?" Tommy asked, as they watched the Dolphins warm up on the field below. Mickey squinted toward the Miami sideline, where the rookie quarterback was throwing passes with the kind of fluid motion that looked effortless, even from the upper deck. "Kid's got an arm, I'll give him that. But this is New York. This is Monday Night Football. Let's see how he handles the pressure when 60,000 people are screaming at him." The pre-game ceremonies felt more elaborate than usual, with additional television cameras and production equipment scattered around the field. Howard Cosell, Frank Gifford, and Don Meredith were working the broadcast for ABC, and their presence added weight to what might otherwise have been just another September game between two teams trying to establish their identity for the season. Tommy used the time before kickoff to study the other fans in his section. These weren't casual observers. These were people who'd planned their week around this game, who'd arranged work schedules and family obligations to be present for 3 hours of football that represented their primary form of entertainment and emotional investment. The woman 2 seats to his left was keeping score in a small notebook, tracking every play with the precision of someone who understood that football was a game of accumulated details. The teenage kid in front of him was wearing a jersey with Walker on the back, supporting a player who'd been traded away years earlier, but whose memory still represented hope for better times. "You ever see anything special here?" Tommy asked Mickey during a lull in the pre-game activity. "Special how?" "I mean like record-breaking performances, games that people talk about years later." Mickey thought about the question while sipping beer from a plastic cup that had probably cost him $4. "I seen some great games, some terrible games, some games that probably shouldn't have been played in weather conditions that made football impossible, but truly special, like something you'd remember for the rest of your life." "Not yet. Think tonight might be different. Kid, you never know when you're going to see history. That's why you show up. That's why you buy the ticket even when you can't afford it. Because sometimes, not often, but sometimes, you witness something that changes your understanding of what's possible." As the teams lined up for the opening kickoff, Tommy felt the familiar surge of anticipation that marked the beginning of every football game. But tonight felt different, more electric, more significant, charged with the possibility that something memorable might unfold under the lights of Monday Night Football. The Jets won the coin toss and elected to receive, and 60,000 people rose to their feet as the ball was kicked into the September night. Tommy found himself screaming along with everyone else, caught up in the tribal energy that transformed individual spectators into a collective force. But as the first quarter progressed, it became clear that this wasn't going to be a typical Thursday night game. Dan Marino, the rookie quarterback who was supposed to be intimidated by the pressure and the crowd, looked like he'd been playing Monday Night Football his entire life. His first pass was a 15-yard completion to the sideline. His second was a 20-yard strike over the middle. By the end of the first quarter, he'd completed 8 of 10 passes for 127 yards and 2 touchdowns, and the Miami Dolphins led 14-0. "Jesus Christ," Mickey muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "Kids carving up our defense like it's a high school scrimmage." Tommy stared at the scoreboard and realized he might be witnessing something unprecedented. Marino wasn't just playing well, he was playing with a precision and confidence that seemed impossible for someone in his first professional season. "Is this normal for rookies?" Tommy asked. "Hell no," Mickey replied. "Most rookies spend their first year learning how to read defenses, how to handle pressure, how to avoid getting killed by linebackers who are faster and stronger than anyone they faced in college. This kid..." Mickey paused and pointed toward the Miami sideline, where Marino was calmly discussing strategy with his coaches. "This kid looks like he's been doing this for 10 years. As the second quarter began, Tommy found himself caught between disappointment that his Jets were losing and fascination with what he was witnessing from the opposing quarterback. This wasn't just a good performance, this was something approaching artistic perfection, a demonstration of what happened when natural talent met preparation, met opportunity. By halftime, Marino had thrown 4 touchdown passes and the Dolphins led 28-14. The crowd at Shea Stadium had gone from enthusiastic to stunned, to grudgingly appreciative of what they were seeing, even as their own team fell further behind. $27 to watch us get destroyed, Tommy said during the break. You're missing the point, kid, Mickey replied, opening another beer. You didn't pay $27 to watch the Jets win. You paid $27 to be here when something special happened. And trust me, what we're watching right now is special. Tommy thought about Mickey's words as the teams prepared for the second half. Maybe the old-timer was right. Maybe witnessing greatness was worth the price of admission, even when that greatness was being displayed by the opposing team. The question was whether Marino was finished or whether the best was yet to come. Behind them, Tommy was beginning to hear a voice that would become increasingly excited as the game progressed. A man who seemed to understand they were witnessing something historic. "This kid's special," the voice shouted after Marino's 4th touchdown pass. "This is something special." Tommy turned around briefly and saw a guy in his 30s wearing a Dolphins jersey, holding what looked like an official scorecard. The man wasn't just watching the game, he was documenting it, understanding that this might be a night worth recording for posterity. As the third quarter was about to begin, Tommy found himself wondering if Mickey was right about witnessing something special. Marino's performance so far had been remarkable, but Monday Night Football had a way of elevating players to levels they'd never reached before. The question was whether this rookie was finished showing off or whether he was just getting started. The third quarter began with Dan Marino completing his first 3 passes for gains of 18, 24, and 31 yards. And Tommy Rodriguez realized that what he'd witnessed in the first half hadn't been a fluke or a lucky streak. It was the beginning of something truly historic. "This is impossible," Mickey Torino said, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and disbelief as Marino threw his 5th touchdown pass of the game, a perfect spiral that seemed to hang in the Monday Night Football lights before settling into his receiver's hands like it had been placed there by divine intervention. Around them, the crowd at Shea Stadium was experiencing something unprecedented. 60,000 Jets fans gradually shifting from disappointment to awe as they witnessed a performance that transcended team loyalty. This wasn't just about Miami beating New York. This was about watching someone do something that was approaching the realm of Monday Night Football legend. "How many touchdown passes is that?" asked the woman 2 seats to Tommy's left, her scorekeeping notebook filled with marks that documented Marino's systematic destruction of the Jets' defense. 5, Tommy replied, checking his own unofficial count. 5 touchdown passes in less than 3 quarters. "Is that good?" Mickey laughed, despite the fact that his team was losing by 3 touchdowns. "Lady, most quarterbacks don't throw 5 touchdown passes in a month. This kid just did it in 45 minutes. Behind them, the Miami fan with the scorecard was getting more animated with each completion. "This is history," he shouted after Marino's 5th touchdown pass. 5 touchdown passes on Monday Night Football. This is fucking history. Tommy found himself studying Marino's mechanics between plays, trying to understand how someone so young could make the game look so effortless. The rookie's throwing motion was unlike anything he'd seen, compact, quick, accurate to a degree that seemed almost computerized. More importantly, Marino showed no signs of the nervousness or uncertainty that typically marked first-year players facing the pressure of Monday Night Football. "Look at his face," Tommy said to Mickey during a television timeout. "He looks calm, like this is normal for him." "That's what separates the great ones," Mickey replied. "The game slows down for them." Everyone else is playing at normal speed, but guys like this, they see everything a split second before it happens. The fourth quarter began with the Dolphins leading 35-17, and it seemed like Marino might coast to victory with his 5 touchdown passes, already establishing the performance as one of the best in Monday Night Football history. But the rookie quarterback showed no signs of letting up, no indication that he was satisfied with what would already be considered a legendary performance. "Think he goes for 6? Tommy asked Mickey as Miami got the ball back with 12 minutes left in the game. "Kid's already in the record books," Mickey replied, "but if I know anything about competitors, he's not going to be happy just tying records. He wants to own them." The answer came on Miami's next possession. With the game well out of reach and nothing left to prove, most quarterbacks would have been content to run out the clock and preserve their historic achievement. But Marino, showing the kind of competitive fire that would define his entire career, took the field looking for more. "This is it," the Miami fan behind them screamed as Marino dropped back to pass. "This is for the Monday Night Football record." The 6th touchdown pass was a thing of beauty, a 28-yard strike to the corner of the end zone that required perfect timing, perfect placement, and the kind of arm strength that couldn't be taught. The ball traveled through the Monday Night Football lights like a guided missile, arriving at its destination with such precision that the defender had no chance to make a play. "6!" the Miami fan screamed, his voice hoarse from 3 hours of excited commentary. "6 fucking touchdown passes, Monday Night Football record, this is history, this is history." The crowd's reaction was unlike anything Tommy had ever experienced at a sporting event. 60,000 people were on their feet, applauding the opposing team's quarterback, understanding that they'd just witnessed something unprecedented in the 30-year history of Monday Night Football. Tommy turned around to get a better look at the guy who'd been providing running commentary all night. He was indeed wearing a Dolphins jersey and holding an official-looking scorecard covered with precise notations. "You keeping official stats?" Tommy asked during the celebration that followed Marino's 6th touchdown. "Damn right I am," the man replied, showing Tommy his scorecard. "I'm a sports writer for the Miami Herald. Been covering football for 8 years, and I ain't never seen nothing like this. The Monday Night Football record was 5 touchdown passes, held by 3 different quarterbacks. This kid just broke it. How rare is this? Monday Night Football's been on the air since 1970, 14 years of games, hundreds of quarterbacks, and nobody had ever thrown 6 touchdown passes until tonight. You're looking at history, my friend." Tommy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the September evening air. He'd spent $27 he couldn't afford to watch his team play, and instead he was witnessing something that would be talked about for decades. This was the kind of performance that created legends, that transformed good players into immortal figures in sports history. "I can't believe it," Tommy said to Mickey as they watched Marino trot off the field to thunderous applause from fans who had arrived hoping to see their own team win. "Believe it, kid. You just saw perfection. You saw what happens when talent meets opportunity meets preparation, and everything goes right at exactly the same time." The final score was Miami 45, New York 17, but the numbers that mattered were Marino's. 21 completions in 28 attempts for 311 yards and 6 touchdown passes. It was a performance that would be replayed on highlight reels for decades, a rookie announcement to the football world that a new era of quarterback play had begun. "How often does something like this happen?" Tommy asked Mickey as they prepared to leave their seats. "Something exactly like this? Never. 6 touchdown passes on Monday Night Football had never been done before tonight. Might not be done again for decades." So we saw history. Kid, you didn't just see history. You were part of it. You were one of 60,000 people who witnessed Dan Marino announce himself to the world. 30 years from now, when people talk about the greatest Monday Night Football performances, they're going to mention this game first. And you can say you were here. The Miami sports writer was still documenting everything, interviewing fans and collecting quotes that would become part of the official record of Marino's historic performance. When he approached Tommy and Mickey, his first question captured the surreal nature of what they'd witnessed. What's it like to pay money to see your team play, only to watch the opposing quarterback have the greatest Monday Night Football game in history? Tommy thought about the question. What was it like to witness greatness at your own team's expense? Honestly, Tommy said, it was incredible. Yeah, we got killed, but you could feel that something special was happening. By the fourth quarter, people weren't even upset about losing. They were just watching in amazement. That's what made it remarkable, Mickey added. The crowd started cheering for Marino. Jets fans, in our own stadium, giving a standing ovation to the guy who was destroying our team. That tells you how special the performance was. As they began the slow walk down from Section 56, Tommy realized that his $27 investment had returned far more than he'd expected. He'd come to see his team play and instead had witnessed something that would be remembered forever. The night a rookie quarterback played perfect football under the lights of Monday Night Football and set a record that might never be broken. The guy behind them was still talking to anyone who would listen. 6 touchdown passes, Monday Night Football record. This is history. And for once, the hyperbole was absolutely accurate. The walk down from Section 56 felt like descending from a mountaintop where Tommy Rodriguez had witnessed something approaching divine intervention. Around him, 60,000 Jets fans were processing what they'd just seen, a performance so dominant, so unprecedented, that it had transformed a football game into something resembling a religious experience. 6 touchdown passes, Mickey Torino kept repeating, shaking his head with the wonder of someone who'd seen enough football to understand the historical significance of what had just occurred. The Monday Night Football record. In 30 years of following this game, I never thought I'd see anything like that. The Miami sports writer who'd been sitting behind them was still in full documentation mode, his scorecard filled with precise notations that would become the official record of Marino's historic performance. As they descended the concrete ramps, he was interviewing other fans, collecting quotes and reactions that would form the basis of his story for the next day's newspaper. "Excuse me," he said to Tommy and Mickey. "I'm writing about tonight's game for the Miami Herald. Mind if I ask what it was like to witness that performance as Jets fans?" Tommy thought about the question. What was it like to pay money to see your team play, only to watch the opposing quarterback break the Monday Night Football record at your expense? "Honestly," Tommy said, "it was incredible. I mean, yeah, we got killed, but you could feel that something special was happening. By the fourth quarter, people weren't even upset about losing. They were just watching in amazement. And that's what made it remarkable," Mickey added. "The crowd started cheering for Marino, Jets fans, in our own stadium, giving a standing ovation to the guy who was destroying our team. That tells you how special the performance was." The sports writer scribbled notes and moved on to other fans, all of whom seemed to be struggling with the same mixture of disappointment and awe that Tommy was feeling. This hadn't been just a loss. It had been a privilege to witness, even if the home team had been on the wrong end of history. As they reached the stadium concourse, Tommy found himself thinking about the broader implications of what he'd seen. Marino's performance hadn't just been about throwing touchdown passes. It had been a demonstration of what was possible when someone refused to be intimidated by circumstances that should have been overwhelming. "Think about it," he said to Mickey as they walked toward the subway entrance. "The guy's a rookie, first-year player, second-round draft pick. Most rookies spend Monday Night Football trying not to embarrass themselves, trying not to make mistakes that end up on national television. This kid treated it like he owned the place. That's what separates the truly great ones, Mickey replied. The stage doesn't matter to them. Pressure doesn't exist. They see the same game, whether it's a pre-season exhibition or the Super Bowl. The subway ride back to Queens was unlike any post-game journey Tommy had ever experienced. Normally, after a Jets loss, the train would be filled with angry, disappointed fans, rehashing missed opportunities and coaching mistakes. Tonight, the conversation was entirely focused on what they'd witnessed from the opposing quarterback. "Did you see that pass in the third quarter?" one fan was saying to his friend. "The one where he threw it before the receiver even made his cut? How do you even do that?" "The kid's arm is unreal," another fan replied. "Some of those throws, the ball was still rising when it got to the receiver, and he's a fucking rookie." 6 touchdown passes on Monday Night Football, a third fan added. "That's going to be on highlight reels until the end of time." Tommy listened to the conversations around him and realized that Marino's performance had accomplished something remarkable. It had united 60,000 people in appreciation of excellence, regardless of team loyalty. This was bigger than Jets versus Dolphins, bigger than winning and losing. This was about witnessing someone operate at a level that most people didn't know was possible. When Tommy reached his stop in Astoria and began the walk to his family's apartment, he found himself thinking about how he would describe the evening to his parents. His father would want to know the final score and whether the Jets had played well. His mother would ask if he'd enjoyed himself and whether the ticket had been worth the money. But how do you explain to people who weren't there that you'd witnessed something that had never happened before in 14 years of Monday Night Football? How do you convey the feeling of watching someone achieve perfection under the brightest lights in professional sports? The apartment was dark when Tommy arrived. His parents had long since gone to bed, and his younger sister was presumably asleep as well. But he was far too wired to sleep, his mind still processing the details of Marino's performance, still trying to understand what he'd been privileged to witness. He sat at the kitchen table and tried to write down everything he could remember, the precise spiral on each touchdown pass, the way Marino had remained calm under pressure that should have been overwhelming, the gradual shift in crowd reaction from disappointment to amazement. He wanted to preserve every detail, understanding that he'd been present for something that would be discussed and analyzed for decades. The next morning, Tommy woke up to newspaper headlines that confirmed what he'd witnessed. Marino makes history. Rookie perfection. 6 TDs on Monday night. The performance was already being hailed as the greatest Monday Night Football game by a quarterback in the show's 14-year history. At work that day, loading trucks at the Queens warehouse where he'd been employed since high school, Tommy found himself constantly interrupted by co-workers who wanted to hear about the game. Word had spread that he'd been at Shea Stadium the night before, and everyone wanted details from someone who'd actually witnessed Marino's historic performance. "What was it like?" his supervisor asked during a break. "I mean, really. What was it like to be there when it happened?" Tommy thought about the question, trying to find words for an experience that felt larger than language. "It was like watching someone do something impossible," he said finally. "Like, you know how sometimes you see a play and think, that was amazing. This was different. This was like watching someone rewrite the rules of what's possible." "The papers are saying it's the Monday Night Football record," another co-worker added. "Not just the record," Tommy replied. "The guy absolutely shattered it. The old record was 5 touchdown passes, and that had only been done 3 times in 14 years. Marino threw 6, and he made it look easy." As the day progressed, Tommy began to understand that his presence at Monday Night Football had given him a kind of currency that extended far beyond the $27 he'd spent on the ticket. He was now someone who'd been there when history was made, someone who could provide first-hand accounts of a performance that would be remembered forever. But more than that, he was beginning to understand the broader lesson of what he'd witnessed. Marino's performance hadn't just been about athletic ability. It had been about seizing the moment when opportunity presented itself, about refusing to be intimidated by circumstances that should have been overwhelming, about performing at your highest level when the stakes were at their greatest. "You realize what you saw?" Mickey Torino said when he called Tommy that evening to continue their discussion of the previous night's game. "You saw what happens when someone's completely prepared for their moment. That kid didn't get lucky 6 times. He threw 6 perfect passes because he'd spent his entire life preparing to throw 6 perfect passes. Think anyone will ever break his record? 6 touchdown passes on Monday Night Football? It's possible, but it's going to take someone special. And they're going to have to do it under the same kind of pressure with the whole country watching. That's not easy to replicate." Tommy hung up the phone and realized that Mickey was right. What they'd witnessed wasn't just about one remarkable game, it was about watching someone announce themselves as a generational talent, someone who would spend the next 15 years redefining what was possible at the quarterback position. And Tommy Rodriguez, a 21-year-old loading dock worker from Queens who'd spent $27 he couldn't afford, had been there to see it all begin. The guy behind them had been absolutely right. This was history, and now Tommy understood that sometimes, if you're willing to sacrifice for the chance to witness greatness, you get to be part of something that will be remembered long after you're gone. 6 touchdown passes on Monday Night Football, a rookie quarterback announcing himself to the world, a performance that would never be forgotten, and Tommy had been there for every perfect throw. 3 days after Dan Marino's historic performance, Tommy Rodriguez was still fielding questions from co-workers, neighbors, and friends who wanted to hear about Monday Night Football from someone who'd actually been there. But it was a conversation with his father that helped him understand the true value of what he'd witnessed. Domingo Rodriguez had worked construction for 35 years, had raised 3 children on a laborer's salary, and had never spent money on entertainment that the family couldn't afford. When Tommy told him about the $27 ticket and Marino's 6 touchdown passes, his father's initial reaction was predictable. "$27 for a football game?" Domingo said, shaking his head. "Mijo, that's grocery money. That's rent money." "I know, Pop, but this was different. This was history. History doesn't pay the bills." But as Tommy described Marino's performance in detail, the precision of his passes, the reaction of the crowd, the feeling of witnessing something that had never been done before on Monday Night Football, he saw his father's expression gradually change. "You really think this was special?" Domingo asked. "Pop, I've been to maybe 20 football games in my life. This wasn't just special, this was impossible. The guy threw 6 touchdown passes. 6 perfect throws in one game on national television. The Monday Night Football record had been 5 touchdown passes, and that had only been done 3 times in 14 years. Domingo was quiet for a long moment, considering his son's words. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Sometimes," he said, "you have to spend money on experiences instead of things. Sometimes being there when something important happens is worth more than whatever you gave up to see it." It was the closest thing to approval Tommy had ever received from his father regarding what might have seemed like frivolous spending. But Domingo understood in a way that surprised his son that some moments justified financial sacrifice, that witnessing greatness could be worth more than material comfort. Over the following weeks, as Marino continued his remarkable rookie season, Tommy found himself following the Dolphins' games with the intense interest of someone who'd been present at the moment when a legend was born. Each game provided new evidence that what he'd witnessed at Shea Stadium hadn't been a fluke. Marino really was operating at a level that few quarterbacks in history had ever achieved. "You see the game last Sunday?" Mickey Torino would call to ask after each Miami victory. Kid threw 4 more touchdown passes. He's on pace to break every rookie record in the book. Tommy did see the games, watching on television with the kind of attention normally reserved for events of personal significance. He'd study Marino's mechanics, his decision-making, his leadership, understanding that he was watching someone who would spend the next decade and a half redefining what was possible at the quarterback position. But it was the calls from friends and acquaintances that really drove home the significance of what he'd witnessed. People who'd heard that Tommy had been at the Monday Night Football game would contact him for details, wanting to hear about Marino's performance from someone who'd seen it firsthand. What was it like? Became the most common question. Really, what was it like to be there when it happened? Tommy found himself becoming something of a neighborhood celebrity, one of the relatively few people who could claim to have witnessed one of the greatest individual performances in Monday Night Football history. The experience taught him something important about the value of being present for significant moments, about the difference between reading about history and actually witnessing it. 6 months later, when Marino was named NFL Rookie of the Year after setting multiple passing records, Tommy received a call from a sports writer at the New York Daily News who was working on a retrospective article about the Monday Night Football performance. "I understand you were at Shea Stadium that night," the writer said. "I'm looking for fan perspectives on what it was like to witness that performance. Mind sharing your thoughts?" Tommy found himself quoted in the newspaper the next day. You could feel that something special was happening. By the fourth quarter, even Jets fans were cheering for Marino because they understood they were watching the Monday Night Football record being broken. The quote appeared alongside comments from other fans who'd been at the game, all of whom seemed to be struggling with the same challenge: how to describe an experience that felt larger than the words available to capture it. As the years passed and Marino's career continued to unfold, Tommy's presence at the Monday Night Football game became a defining story in his personal mythology. He would tell his children about the night he'd watched a rookie quarterback throw 6 touchdown passes and break a record that had stood as the Monday Night Football standard. "Why didn't you keep the ticket stub?" his daughter would ask when she was old enough to understand the significance of what her father had witnessed. "I was so caught up in watching the game that I never thought about keeping souvenirs," Tommy would reply. "I was just trying to process what I was seeing." But the lack of physical memorabilia didn't diminish the value of the experience. Tommy carried the memory of that night like other people carried photographs, understanding that he'd been present for something that would be remembered long after the specific details of his own life had been forgotten. In 2005, when Marino retired after 17 seasons and was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, Tommy made the trip to Canton, Ohio for the ceremony. He wanted to see the quarterback who'd provided him with one of the most memorable experiences of his life receive the recognition he deserved. During the ceremony, when Marino was introduced to the crowd, Tommy found himself thinking back to that September night in 1984, remembering the feeling of watching someone announce themselves to the world through sheer force of talent and determination. After the ceremony, Tommy approached Marino during a public signing session and told him about being at Shea Stadium for the 6-touchdown performance. "That was quite a night," Marino said, signing a football for Tommy. "One of those games where everything just felt perfect. The passes, the timing, the protection, everything was working exactly the way it was supposed to. Did you know you were making history while it was happening? By the 5th touchdown, I knew something special was going on. When I threw the 6th one, I knew I'd broken the Monday Night Football record. But during the game, you're just focused on the next play, the next throw. It's only afterward that you realize how rare those moments are." Tommy treasured that brief conversation, understanding that he'd been able to share his perspective with the person who'd created the memory that had become so important to his own life story. When Tommy died in 2019 at age 56, after a brief battle with cancer, his family found among his possessions a scrapbook dedicated entirely to Dan Marino's career. The book contained newspaper clippings, magazine articles, and photographs spanning 17 seasons, but the centerpiece was a detailed, handwritten account of the Monday Night Football game at Shea Stadium on September 21st, 1984. The account, written in Tommy's careful handwriting, documented every touchdown pass, every crowd reaction, every moment of a performance that had transformed a routine football game into something approaching art. At the bottom of the final page, Tommy had written a single sentence that captured the essence of what the experience had meant to him. Sometimes $27 buys you 3 hours of entertainment. Sometimes it buys you a lifetime of memories. At Tommy's funeral, Mickey Torino, now in his 80s and walking with a cane, stood up during the eulogy portion and told the story of the night he and a young man from Queens had witnessed the greatest Monday Night Football performance in the show's history. Tommy understood something that a lot of people never figure out, Mickey said to the packed church. He understood that being there when history happens is worth whatever you have to sacrifice to see it. He spent money he couldn't afford to witness something that can't be bought, and he never regretted it for a second. The story of Dan Marino's 6-touchdown performance became part of Monday Night Football folklore, replayed countless times on television and referenced whenever discussions turned to the greatest individual achievements in the show's history. But for those who had been there, who had felt the electricity in Shea Stadium, who had watched a rookie quarterback achieve perfection under the brightest lights in professional football, the memory remained something more personal, more immediate, more profound. Tommy Rodriguez had spent $27 to watch his team play and instead had witnessed the birth of a legend. He had chosen experience over financial security, wonder over practicality, and the decision had provided him with a story that defined the rest of his life. Sometimes $27 really does buy you history, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, you're smart enough to understand what you're witnessing while it's happening, rather than realizing its significance only after it's over. The guy behind Tommy had been right all along. This was history. And Tommy Rodriguez had been there to see every perfect throw,